who are not spoken to by live and responsive adults will not learn to speak properly. Children who are not answered will stop asking questions. They will become incurious. And children who are not told stories and who are not read to will have few reasons for wanting to learn to read.
Hey man, you gotta read this. You won't be able to put it down.
It's that good, huh?
You won't believe it.
Thanks. Speaking of reading, everybody can read, right? Wrong. Even with public schools and plenty of libraries and literacy programs, there are still kids graduating from high school who can't read beyond the 3rd grade level. These are kids who never get inside the worlds of Tom Sawyer, Gulliver, or Black Beauty. Well, you have the opportunity to help the kids in your life. Take time to read to them, to open up their worlds, and to make a world of difference.
Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place.
Children who are read to frequently and consistently and a lot show such better preparedness for when reading instruction begins, that they understand how language works, how words are put together, how words sound. It prepares them so that this event that happens in kindergarten, 1st grade is not so uncomfortable and so unfamiliar.
The child who's read to early in their lives has a definite advantage over children who don't receive that benefit. It comes in the form of learning something as simple as, here is a book, someone wrote it, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's an expectation about what's going to happen, and then there's all that wonderful language and rich vocabulary. There is a definite advantage to reading to a child early in terms of the skills that they gain in other areas and how that impacts when they begin school.
I can remember reading with my mother, and the books that we would read had great morals to them. And I learned a lot from them, because now I look back on the stories that I read back then, and I can remember, I think that if I hadn't read that book, I may not feel the same way about that sort of situation, or just I may not have gained a lot from, as much as I did from reading that kind of a story.
Because really the story takes the stress out of the conversation, and it's playtime, it's imagination time, and so much more so with my 4-year-old. We're reading mysteries to my 8-year-old, but with the 4-year-old, it's still a tremendous amount of make-believe, and that's a lot of fun. Take her picture.
We know that children don't all learn to read at the same rate. Some children are just going to learn to read faster than others and at an earlier time. But what's important is that they all get exposed to books, that someone reads to them, and what better person to do that than the parent?
Reading aloud to children promotes success in school and in life. If you take the time to read to your children, you'll help them develop a better understanding and appreciation of language and communication. Through the lives of their favorite characters, they can learn how to handle life and its challenges, and that translates to better relationships and problem-solving skills. Plus, most kids are capable of understanding books that are far beyond their reading level, and that increases their vocabulary and their knowledge of words. And you might just learn something too.
Oh yeah, sure, I know I should be reading to my child, but who's got the time to do that these days? Both work. And evenings and weekends are pretty much shot with soccer practice, scouts, you name it. I don't know anybody with that kind of time to spare.
Take up my day. I mean, you get up in the morning, you gotta somehow get on that freeway and get to work. By the time you get home from work, you really don't feel like it. I mean, it would be nice to sit down, I suppose, and relax and read to the children, but...
My kids are 4th, 5th, and 7th graders. I thought at that age they should be reading to us. And what's this all about? Aren't kids pretty much programmed to read on their own?
And it's really hard for parents, because parents don't have time. I've been there. You often think, I don't have time to do this. But if you're only thinking about 10 minutes a day, that's all, 10 minutes a day.
Oh my goodness, what do you have?
Mom, look, I found a new book for story time.
Great, I can't wait for us to read it together. How about bedtime?
Okay.
Okay, see you in a minute. All right. You've been working late, traveling, you need to get groceries. Life is stressful. But the 10 or 15 minutes a day you take time to read to your child will be time well spent. Research shows that children who are read to grow up to be readers. And even when kids are well on their way to reading on their own, parents can continue to read aloud for years to come. We're talking 15 minutes a day, probably the most important part of their day.
The beanstalk never grew again, but it didn't matter. A mile or two down the main road when he met, and they will make
There
their
isn't
fortune.
anything that I do during the day probably as important as reading to my son at night. I'm busy, life is hard, but you have to take time. You take time now, you take time later. I always make time for that. I put that right up there with eating. We eat, we read.
It can be a challenge to feel like you really have the time to devote to reading aloud. But the great thing about reading aloud, reading a story, is, you know, sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 10, 15 minutes. It's not a great time commitment.
I think one of the most important things that parents can hear about reading to their child is that it is truly nutrition for the mind. It's one of those critical parenting responsibilities, much like assuring that they have the right kind of food or the right kind of clothing to wear in different types of weather. It still becomes your responsibility as a parent to make sure that your child has that kind of nutritional food for their mind.
Ruby gave Rosalind a $5 bill.
So it can be a parent, it can be a brother or sister, or it can be a grandparent. What a joy for a grandparent.
What new books have you got for me today?
A book about dinosaurs, a book about space.
Which one you want to hear?
Dinosaurs.
Okay. Oh, it's got some good pictures in it, doesn't it? Just as important as a child's communication and reading skills is the fact that spending time with the child lets them know that they're loved, that they're special. When you take time to read to your children or grandchildren, well, it sends a signal that you value spending your time with them. It's a time where you can not only exchange information, develop good communication skills, but share interest and strengthen your bonds. So, which is your favorite dinosaur?
Often parents choose books by the cover, which is an old cliche, but the best way to choose a book for your child is to read the book yourself.
If your child has a specific interest in an area, help him choose books that maybe, as they get older, that he can read on his own level, or that you will be able to read to them at a level that may be beyond their reading capabilities.
Children who are read to generally cherish books and cherish learning to read, and then pass that on to their children as a significant part of their life.
Children, this is Gloria, announced Officer Buckle. Gloria obeys my commands. Gloria, sit.
If a parent will choose books that have a lot of rhyme and repetition, then it helps them figure out how words sound and how they're going to look and how to begin to guess and infer what a word might be. All the great classics that repeat words over and over that might drive a parent nuts are actually preparing their child to know how words are supposed to sound and look, which is so important when they begin to try to put the letters together themselves.
And you can start when they're babies. You could even start with a 3 or 4 month old.
It seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said.
Taking time to read to your child is so beneficial that it's never too early to start. I've been reading a lot lately about how to be a good parent. Did you know that learning to talk and language development begin as soon as the child is born? That's a lot earlier than you might think, isn't it? Children learn language by imitation, and one way to accomplish this is to read with your child. Talk about stories and pictures, and before you know it, they'll be bringing you books to read to them. Take time to read to your child, right from the beginning of life. Old pictures and lots of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house.
That was a fine place.
A told B and B told
Like Charlotte,
C.
there's no denying that. Almost all spiders are rather
the day
nice.
came when the cow's milk ran dry, and Jack's mother decided that the best thing to do was to sell her.
I think reading aloud offers such an enormous potential for building vocabulary.
It promotes values and critical thinking.
Books are great. You can have every adventure right at your fingertips without leaving the house.
Reading aloud stimulates imagination and promotes curiosity.
I think when you read a book, you can have your own imagination, and you can imagine how that character would be and imagine what they would look like and what they would wear.
Reading aloud helps a child learn to listen to a story and to follow a plot.
It promotes values and critical thinking.
Reading aloud to children is probably one of the best gifts you can give to your family.
Reading enhances vocabulary and encourages understanding of the language.
And what we're giving children by reading to them is the tools that will enable them to communicate their wants and needs, and most of all, their ideas.
Reading aloud is just plain fun.
By the time your child reaches the 4th grade, they'll be well on their way to reading on their own. Although you'll begin to see your time pay off, don't stop there. Continue to read aloud together and explore the language and content of the books with your child. Take time to read to help equip your child with the tools for success. Don't worry if some books are too difficult. Talk about what those new words mean. It's that kind of experience that can help develop a strong vocabulary. And take your kids to the library. There are thousands of books to choose from, and the librarian is always there to help. You'll probably find someone there who's ready to share a good story.
In the corner, there was a dark, dark box. And in the box, there was a mouse. And that's the end of A Dark, Dark Tale.
We encourage reading aloud from the very beginning. And the library is a good place to start. If you're not sure about where to start, we have people here who love to share their favorite stories. We love to tell you what our favorite books are and what we like to read to children. And we invite you to come to story times with your children so that you kind of see what we do and the kind of books that we read.
You can see now why reading aloud to the children in your life is so important. It prepares them for success in school and life. It fires up their imagination, expands their vocabulary, and shows them you care. Take time to read, to open up a whole new world, to make a world of difference.
It really feels a connection, you know, at all levels, not just a language and a story level, but, you know, at a father-daughter, a father-son level.
I know that reading aloud to my children is one of the easiest, most economical ways that I can provide that significant advantage. And the more time I can put into it, the more it's going to pay off. It's a unique opportunity to share with the child and get involved and get them excited.
Reading can prepare you for life. If you get it early, you get the love of reading early. The love of books early is something that you can take with you wherever you go.